his own plan for an Auschwitz in the Middle East. The Prophet Muhammad is a genocidal maniac. They're struck by lightning. And he's called on Muslims. He says the day of redemption will only come, the day of judgment, when Muslims fight the Jews and kill them, when the Jews hide behind the rocks and the trees, and the rocks and the trees cry out, "O Muslim, there's a Jew hiding behind me, come and kill him." That's on the website at USC. That hadith, that saying of the Prophet. So it's no mystery why there's no peace in the Middle East. It's because there can only be a peace for the Arabs when they get rid of the Jews. And the Christians, by the way. The Christian population of Bethlehem has had a catastrophic decline because of the persecutions. The Copts in Egypt are slaughtered. The slogan of the Arab movement against Israel, because there were no Palestinians until the KGB actually invented them in 1964. The slogan was, "Push the Jews into the sea." The slogan of the PLO was, "Push the Jews into the sea." And what happened was that Arafat's KGB advisors said to him, "You're never going to get anywhere calling to push the Jews in the sea." Because, of course, the powerful world is the world of Western democracies. And it has this code of tolerance. What you have to do is say that you want self-determination for Palestinians. That's when they appear. Of course, not in Jordan, which is 60% population Palestinian. You have to make your movement about self-determination for Palestinians. Then you will begin to seduce the world, which is exactly what's happened. But it shows how important Marxists were to the development of this Islamic threat as we know it. And of course, for the Islamists, it's a religious duty to lie to infidels. So they lie. It's really simple. Somebody asked me, how can you know if a Muslim is your friend? Well, let them denounce the war that these Islamists have declared against America, Jews, Christians, also gays and women for that matter. And if they do that, then they're your friend. And you just look at Zuhdi Yasser and how does everybody know who Zuhdi Yasser is? I mean, he's the one good Muslim that we know about. I mean, he's very public. He's a doctor in Arizona. You can see him on, he's on Fox and other channels. But you're very forthright in attacking. Of course, he thinks it's a perversion of Islam. That's fine. But it's very easy to tell who your friends are. And that goes for all these leftists who've never, now they attack the Soviet Union that no longer exists. But if they're not speaking somewhat like I do, they haven't changed one iota from what they were. They're just trying to carry on the same battle under a different guise. When you see an organization like CARE, the Council on American Islam Relations, which pretends to be a civil rights organization, its model is those communist organizations, the Emergency Civil Liberties Committee, the Committee for the Protection of the Foreign-Born. They understand, our enemies understand that our Achilles heel is our tolerance. Our Achilles heel is our concern about other people. And they exploit it. And they lie about it. And the only way to hold them to account is, well, how come you're not protesting the oppression of women in Egypt? Are you aware that 90% of the women in Egypt have their clitorises sliced off for Muslim? How many people know that? Custom and law? Good. I actually staged sit-ins at it's very hard to get conservative students to do this, I have to say. We're always tripping over our principles. To hold sit-ins at Women's Studies Department to protest their silence over the oppression of women in Islam. It's hundreds of millions of women who are chattel, slaves. They can't go out without an escort. They can't. I mean, of course, in Saudi Arabia, they can't even drive cars. In many of these Muslim countries, they can't get an education. If they get raped, they can be executed. The big poster I put up for my Islamofascism Awareness Weeks, which you saw in the film, was of a Taliban soldier executing a woman who had been accused of fornication. And he did it on a soccer field that America gave to Afghanistan. Why are we giving these people anything? The reporter who took the video, you can see this on, just put Taliban soldier executes woman, I think you'll find it on YouTube, asked, why are you doing this on this soccer field? Why are you executing this woman? He said, well, if the Americans will give us an execution chamber, we'll do it there. I mean, that's just play soccer on the field. These are savages. And actually, that's probably an insult to American savages who, how politically incorrect am I? This is a war of civilization versus barbarism. But what makes it such a difficult war, and why organizations like this are so important, and why education, information is the key, is because the American left, which is in control of our universities and our schools, all these government unions, particularly the teacher unions, they're all communist, their leaders are all communists. And I use that not because the Communist Party it is actually still around, is an important force, but because their ideas are the ideas of communism. Corporations are evil, profit is evil. Basically, we want the government to force people to live the way we want them to live. Did you all see the little girl who had her sandwich taken away in school? That's the totalitarian future, people. We know what's good for you, and you're going to like it or not. And, you know, it proceeds along stages. Eventually, they shoot you if you don't go along with the program. This is a battle for America, and unfortunately, the institutions of our culture are all on the other side. Now, there's a lot of people who don't know what's going on. There's a lot of people who don't understand the implications of what they're doing. And that's always important to remember. There are people who do, but there are also people among them who don't. And if you saw the Occupy Wall Street is being interviewed, you saw, I mean, these are blithering idiots. I mean, I don't know what, but they're products of our school system. On our universities, a change took place in the 1980s. Well, in terms of Middle Eastern studies. An Egyptian who pretended to be a Palestinian named Edward Said, who was also a Marxist and a hater of America and Israel, a very cultured man, a pianist, very cultured, and a literary scholar, wrote a book called Orientalism. And the thrust of the book was that any white person who was a scholar of the Middle East was a racist, and therefore their work was useless. And so began a recruitment in the 1980s of Muslims of color from all over the terrorist world. Basically what happened. So our Middle Eastern Studies Department are now, they're Muslim Brotherhood operations. And also, of course, the Saudis came in with tons of money and funded them. What they do is, like at Berkeley, which I happen to know something about, they go in, they put up the initial money to create the department. Then the U.S. government, under Title VI, funds all the academics that they hire. How bad is it? Well, I have a friend who unfortunately gave them $3 million for the Middle Eastern Studies Department, a Jew who loves Israel. And then he found out that it was all this Nazi propaganda against the Jews coming out of this Middle Eastern Studies. So he stopped. I think he had put $1 million of the $3 million in. And he said he wanted a chair of Jewish studies. So what did they do? They hired a woman who had been fired at Tel Aviv University for plagiarism, who was a vicious, self-hating Jew, anti-Israel, anti-American ideologue. Don't make the mistake of thinking that these things happen because administrations don't know they're happening. They do. The left has colonized their liberal arts colleges of our universities. Any field that has studies after it is probably a loaded, or not, 100% Marxist and communist, anti-American. I've written several books. I don't think we brought any of them, but I wrote a book called One Party Classroom, which is just 170 courses just taken from the university catalog, which are indoctrination courses, and clearly so. For example, there's a course at Santa Cruz, which is described in the catalog in exactly these words. The goal of this course is to learn how to organize a revolution, and it tells you the revolution is anti-capitalist and anti-racist. That's not an academic course, that is an indoctrination course. But I've found 170 of them. I picked 12 public, private, small, large universities. It's everywhere. There is no university that can be insulated from these trends because the professions are all organized nationally. And indoctrination in the classroom is now an accepted pedagogical methodology. Somebody here had a book I wrote called Reforming Our Universities. Would give you the clearest picture of what's happened in our schools, because it's about my failed campaign to get an academic Bill of Rights put into place. The academic Bill of Rights is a completely liberal in the sense that Hubert Humphrey might have been a liberal, not Al Gore. And it basically says when there's a controversial issue, and every significant issue in liberal arts is controversial because you can't perform an experiment and prove a theory false. So it's all opinions. Anytime there's a controversial issue, the professor should present both sides of the controversy in a fair way. And I was pilloried and attacked, and from one side of the country to the other. My main antagonists, of course, were the teacher unions, the American Federation of Teachers and the American Association of University Professors. But both organizations are run by what I would call Stalinists. And the sad part is that I did not get support from the Republican Party. And the conservative movement is much better on the K-12 schools, but a little oblivious when it comes to what's happened to our educational system. I have been banned. Where was I banned? I have spoken at over 400 universities and was banned at St. Louis University, which is a Jesuit school. There's nothing sadder than the state of Catholic colleges in this country. There are one or two that I've encountered. The Catholic U in Washington, D.C., I think is fairly decent. But this one is really bad. The dean of students, he's got to be a raving leftist. He kept putting conditions. I mean, I had been invited by students. They had got the funds to get me there. And he would say things like, well, there has to be somebody on the platform from the Middle East Studies Department explaining where Horowitz is wrong. And I said, okay. And then it was, there has to be somebody to explain Catholic values from the platform. And I said, okay, and then they stopped making conditions. It just didn't happen. But the week that they said there had to be somebody explaining Catholic values, that weekend, there was a 3-day conference staged by the Muslim Students Association, which is a front for the Muslim Brotherhood. And I looked over the panels. One of the panels was on why, of course, there's no oppression of women in Islam. And by the way, and these are the words, Islam is the perfect religion. This is a Catholic school. If the Catholic students wanted to hold a conference to say Catholicism is the perfect Christianity, they would be vetoed, because that would be discriminatory. What you have to understand is this: the left has been hugely successful at transforming our culture so that we see any person of color as an oppressed person that needs the government to rig the system so they get a fair shake. Of course, there are no racists. It's not like anybody is saying there are. Does anybody say there are racists in our university, our left-wing university admissions offices? So why do we have this affirmative action ruling if there aren't racists there? It's to rig the system so that they can get their balance. Anyway, once you understand that, Muslims are of color, and therefore they're oppressed. Those who are at war with the United States, why are they at war? Because they're oppressed. That's the lie that you have to attack. That's the lie. And that takes, you got to read, you got to get I see there's a lot of good literature. I may say I'm honored to be on a platform with Brigitte Gabriel and her organization. She's doing heroic work. There are several heroic women doing this work, Noni Darwish and Wafa Sultan, and Urshi Manji among them. So we have very articulate people. We have a new universe with an internet so that people can get access to information. There are a lot of websites with the information. What we need is the ground forces, which is what you are. And let me also say, we're all saying this election is the most important of our lives, and if we lose it, the country is lost. I think that's a good mentality from now till November. But conservatives, first of all, conservatives don't like politics. The left loves politics because politics is about getting power. And they want the power because they want to change the world, just as Obama said. So they begin their politics. Well, I went to commie camp. I was marching when I was 9. The conversation in my family was all political. The fights in my family were, I didn't fight with my father over use of the family car. I fought with him over the Soviet intervention in Hungary, which I was against when I was 17. That was our big fight. Or I went to Columbia and we read an anti-Marxist text. That was the kind of fights that I had. But conservatives, they get their politics from the Boy Scouts and so far as their politics, and Girl Scouts, and Conservatives want to do creative things. They create businesses. And that means that you don't want to alienate customers, and that means you avoid conflict. Everything that unsuits you for the political battle. And conservatives go into politics, which they hate, just because government is getting in their hair too much. It's a big disadvantage that we have. Big disadvantage. So we have to school ourselves and understand that this is a war. But because conservatives don't like politics, we're always looking for a quick fix. We want a Supreme Court decision that'll stop all this. I don't know how many times, I mean, conservatives are always looking for a one-shot deal. It's not going to happen. I think it was Jim who said it's a marathon. If Obama wins on election day, this country will be in dire straits, and Israel probably will be toast. But the battle will go on. If he loses on election day, we'll be much better off, but the battle will go on. These people that we're talking about, and I'm talking about Barack Obama, who came from the same left that I did. He came from the communist left. He was trained by communists. They all supported the Soviet Union and China. They killed 100 million people. They supported them. The whole thing collapsed because it was built on a fantasy that people on the left haven't a clue as to how to organize a society, how to get people to work, how to create wealth. I read whole libraries of socialist books in my salad days when I was green in judgment. I didn't make that Shakespeare. And I never read a chapter on how to create wealth. It's all about how do you take it away, redistribute it. That's all it's about. Socialism is theft. But we are going to be fighting them. These people, but no. Look at what happened. The whole house of cards collapsed. The worst poverty in human history imposed on people. Man-made famines. 100 million people slaughtered. How long did it take them to regroup and fight again and finally elect a president who was one of them? Not very long. If you aren't ready for that kind of battle, we will lose. I will close on this note of optimism. I'm not going to leave you. I'm not going to leave you depressed. No, because then you won't remember it. In April 1941, Germany had overrun all of Western Europe. Japan had overrun all of Southeast Asia and Manchuria. It was Hitler. America was next. I mean, you had to read a little between the lines, but if you read Nazi propaganda, you knew what was coming. Gallup did a poll, and the poll asked, should America get involved in the war? And after all, Americans are all descended from people in Europe or Southeast Asia or what have you. Should America get involved in the war? 80% of the American people said no. And then came Pearl Harbor. So the moral of this story is that Americans, and there's a reason for that. Why did 80% say no? Because America is such a great country. People are so busy. There are so many things to, opportunities. There's so much freedom. Who wants to go to war? So, okay, questions? And I have to get back to.
Yes,
I live behind the Reagan Library. What better place? And I got to get back there because I got a hockey game I want to see tonight.
Have you been up there?
No.
Anyway, I wanted to ask a question about the Frankfurt group. I didn't hear anything mentioned about them. They originally came out of Germany and then moved over here.
Yeah, they were a bunch of Marxists. One of them was at UC San Diego, Marcuse. Did a lot of damage. Our intellectual life is gone. It's just gone. Our intellectuals are at think tanks. You know, our Thomas Sowell, Victor Davis Hanson, those are, they're not in universities. There's a handful. In any university in the liberal arts, there'll be 3 or 4, maybe. Some schools, I couldn't locate a single one.
Yes, I'd like to know why the Jews of Hollywood support Obama.
The Jews, yeah. Norman Horowitz, I love this, because Norman Horowitz wrote a 500 or 400-page book called Why Are Jews Liberals? I don't, you know, that would be a whole evening lecture, and I'm not sure I know the answer.
It makes no sense.
Well, Jews are look, you got to give this to the Jews, that, you know, anywhere there's a religion, it was probably led by a Jew, Jesus being the most famous example. But the Hare Krishnas, Marxism, leftism. What unfortunately too many people call liberalism today is a religion. It's a crypto religion. People cannot, I wrote a book about this called A Point in Time, which we don't have with us. But people can't live without feeling that their lives have some kind of meaning. It can't just be, you know, it's brief enough, you're born, you live an eye blink's worth of time, and then it's all gone, and it will disappear forever. So if you have a religious faith, what you have is a faith that there is a creator, that now we see through a glass darkly, but then face to face, and it'll all make sense on the other side. If you don't have that belief, then you want to create the world anew. And I saw we had Thomas Paine. He was actually a radical, Paine, but that's his phrase. So people find meaning in changing the world. And if you think of it, it follows completely, actually, the Christian idea. There's a fall from paradise. That's called, they call it primitive communism. But anyway, the world is a fallen place. We live through a veil of tears, and then there's a redemption. And the problem is that their redemption is them. They're the Messiah. They're the Savior. I call them social redeemers. They're going to make a world where everybody gets along. I mean, how stupid is that? How long do you have to live to know nobody? It's very rare for people to get along, or there have to be pretty controlled circumstances.
Up here?
Yeah. So I don't know if that answers your question. So Jews, unfortunately, are pretty deracinated. They were liberated. Jews actually lived in ghettos. Blacks don't live in ghettos. A ghetto is where you can't leave. So they were completely closed off in the societies they lived in, and then came the emancipation of the, you know, along with the French Revolution and all those ideas, and Jews assimilated. You will find, if you look at Reform Jews, another way of looking at Judaism is there's Reform Judaism, Conservative Judaism, and Orthodox Judaism. And Reform Judaism is referred to by other Jews who are more religious as the Democratic Party with holidays.